Frau Bundespräsidentin Eveline Widmer-Schlumpf,
dear
Chancellor,
Federal President Eveline Widmer-Schlumpf, Federal Chancellor Dr. Merkel,
distinguished heads of state, of government, Royal Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, a cordial welcome to the 42nd annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. Here we are again, the world's foremost gathering of multi-stakeholders, and I'm pleased to welcome among you our partners and members, to welcome the representatives of governments and international organizations, the representatives of our constituents, civil society, NGOs, faith leaders, trade unions, young global leaders, university leaders, and this year particularly, I welcome also our new community of global shapers, a community of extraordinary young people between 20 and 30 years old, a community which will inaugurate at the very end of this evening in a very short ceremony. Since we met last year, there was a lot of discussion on crises, on catastrophes, and if I look at our global risk report, which we published just some weeks ago, we had identified 50 different risks and challenges which the world has to address simultaneously. And many of those risks and challenges are close to a tipping point. Sometimes we have the feeling that we cannot cope with all those issues anymore, and that the world is suffering from a kind of burnout syndrome. And Davos, by the way, would be the right place to address such a burnout syndrome, because Davos has been traditionally a sanatorium. So in some way, we are a sanatorium for the world over the next 5 days. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this annual meeting is the great transformation, the search and the shaping of new models. We have chosen this theme with the intention that we do not look only at crisis situation in the world, but we look at the great transformation which is taking place and which sometimes goes even unnoticed because we are so absorbed with what's happening daily. The world has changed tremendously, and we are in need for new models. I just give you 2 examples. We speak about the reform of capitalism, but actually the most decisive competitive resource today is not anymore capital, it's talent. Talent based on entrepreneurship, talent based on innovation. Or just take another example. In those times of crisis, people ask for strong leadership, decisive action. And I think the Chancellor can tell us a lot about it. But actually, leadership today is not anymore based on the old model of hard power. It has to be based on the model of collaborative power. So, that's the intention, to design those new conceptual models which should be the framework for our decision making. But just to look at new concepts is not enough. We need longer term visions. We have a visions gap in the world. What is the purpose of what we are doing? And we need also shared values. So my wish for this meeting is threefold: that we build, we bond, and we bind. We build in searching for constructive new solutions, new models. We bond by looking for long-term visions, and we bind by creating the necessary underpinning framework of shared values. And in this sense, I wish you all a very good annual meeting 2012. And I have now the pleasure to introduce to you the President of the Swiss Confederation and Federal Councillor of the Federal Department of Finance of the Swiss Confederation, Mrs. Eveline Widmer-Schlumpf. And I introduce you with particular pleasure because Switzerland has many cantons, but you are from this canton, so we are in your home in some way. And I would like to use this opportunity also to thank our Swiss host for the great welcome we find here every year. And I would include into those thanks not only the federal government, but also the cantonal government, represented here by Barbara Janom-Steiner, the Councillor and President of Graubünden. And I would particularly express my thanks to the community of Davos, represented here by the Mayor of Davos, of Landschaft Davos and Gemeinde. And being in Switzerland the oldest democracy, I have to mention also that we are joined here by many members of the different parliaments, inclusive their respective presidents. Again, a very cordial thank you, and a thank you to the Davos population. And now, Mrs. Widmer-Schlumpf, you open the annual meeting 2012 as it is the tradition.
Federal Chancellor, President of the National Council, President of the Council of States, Mr. and Mrs. Schwab, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and an honor to have the privilege of welcoming you to this year's World Economic Forum in my native canton, the Canton of the Grisons. Back in 2008, we were all fully aware that the severe financial crisis and the ensuing global economic slowdown in 2008 and 2009 would leave deep and long-lasting scars in our economies. This is particularly true for most advanced economies. Many of us have taken strong measures to correct the large macroeconomic imbalances created by this crisis. We also have made significant efforts to reduce the systemic risks coming from the financial sector. Emerging market economies have also played a crucial role in the past years. Their strong growth performance provided invaluable support for the global economy. Unfortunately, economic developments in the second half of last year have been discouraging. The global economic outlook has deteriorated and uncertainty as regards financial markets and public finances remains high. Clearly, the measures taken until now have not been sufficient, and complacency would be the wrong attitude. In a world that is increasingly complex and interrelated, efforts to deal with the ongoing challenges must be internationally coordinated. The World Economic Forum provides an important platform to discuss these matters. However, let's not forget, the main responsibility for taking further measures lies with national governments. International coordination is not and never will be a substitute for structural reforms in individual countries. We should not shirk our responsibility to take the difficult but necessary steps. While the short-term issues currently dominate our policy agendas, we should not forget the numerous long-term challenges we all face. As politicians, policymakers, and leaders of global companies, our time horizon tends to be short. Results in the near future seem to be what counts. Therefore, we like to ignore issues that have consequences in 20 to 30 years from now. In this regard, the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2012 provides valuable insights. Chronic fiscal imbalances and increasing greenhouse gas emissions rank very high on the list of problems. Both of these issues will mainly affect future generations. I'm deeply convinced that we must act now for the future. We must not burden the young with problems we have created. I would like to share some thoughts with you on the two issues I have just mentioned: chronic fiscal imbalances and climate change. The situation of public finances is a matter for concern in many countries. This is partly a consequence of the financial crisis, but also because some countries have allowed public debt to grow for years. With average public debt of advanced economies currently at over 100% of GDP, an increase of 30 percentage points in only 3 years, we are now in the midst of a serious public debt crisis. Fortunately, the emerging economies have not experienced similar developments. Their public debt remains at relatively low levels. The dimension of the crisis is such that it has become one of the main risks for the global economic outlook and is threatening the common European currency, the euro. These dynamics must be broken, and debt must be brought back down to a sustainable level. This will require political difficult measures and sufficient growth. What should worry us even more is that the current fiscal challenges are only a taste of what we face in the medium and long term. Due to aging populations, particularly in advanced economies, public finances will have to bear huge additional burdens. These arise not only from commitments made by social insurances, but also from the rapidly rising costs of healthcare. With the baby boom generation now retiring, the ratio between the workforce and the retired is deteriorating to an ever greater extent. This means future generations will have to bear a higher burden. These facts are not new. Most countries faced with aging populations regularly publish long-term sustainability reports. These show a dramatic increase of public debt under a no policy change scenario. They also show clearly that the later we act, the more it will cost to solve the problems. We have an obligation to act now. Far-reaching measures are necessary to put the financing of social insurance on solid footing. These include, depending on the point of departure, increased contributions and/or reductions in benefits. In the area of health, we need to find ways to contain the explosion in costs. In this context, examining and correcting the system of incentives is key, as well as implementing measures to promote better public health. Compromises will have to be found here between what is socially desirable and what is financially feasible. The world is also facing challenges in energy and environmental policies. Here again, The costs of inaction will be borne mainly by future generations. The improvement in worldwide welfare is linked to a rise in consumption of energy and environmental resources, including non-renewable resources. The regrettable events in Fukushima have made it clear that nuclear energy can't guarantee us a safe supply of energy either. Like several other countries, Switzerland has strengthened its efforts to draft a sustainable energy strategy. The aim is to improve the efficiency in energy use, conserve non-renewable resources, and rely to a greater extent on renewable sources of energy. We have also decided in principle to exit from nuclear power generation. Energy strategies will also have to include the pricing of resources. Increasing prices will be necessary to cover the various externalities and to appropriately influence demand. This should also contribute substantially to environmental conservation and to mitigating climate change. Of course, progress in dealing with these environmental issues depend crucially on international cooperation. Therefore, it is not surprising that environment is a permanent feature of the discussions with this forum. Allow me to draw a brief conclusion. The short-term challenges to the world economy are daunting. To reduce the considerable domestic and international imbalances, resolute action is required in many countries, and cooperation in international fora should be strengthened. While we are fully focused on dealing with the immediate problems, we should not forget the even greater challenges that we face in the long term. The costs of unsustainable public finances and environmental conditions are large. We can't leave this to be shouldered by future generations. Acting now requires the integrity of the policymakers, the cooperation of all responsible bodies, and creative solutions. I'm looking forward to interesting discussions at this year's forum and wish you much creative thinking.
Frau Bundeskanzlerin,
Federal Chancellor Angela Merkel,
wir erinnern uns alle
I'm sure we all remember
an Ihre Rede
the
letztes Jahr.
great speech you made here last year,
Wahrscheinlich hat sie dazu beigetragen,
and I think that's maybe have contributed to the fact that many of us
das Vertrauen in den Euro nicht ganz verloren
have still not completely lost our trust in the euro, because last year you declared your faith in the euro, you declared your faith in Europe. A lot of people say that 2012 is going to be a decisive year. And the pessimists say that it could possibly be the year of possible collapse of the euro, and as a consequence of that, perhaps the disintegration of the European Union itself. As a real European, right from the beginning, I have another view. I believe that 2012, and perhaps we need a few more years after that, could be an opportunity. an opportunity for the rebirth of the great European project and the further development of the great and magnificent European project. The late lamented President of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, and I quote, "I thoroughly believe that Europe will never more tolerate being divided. On the contrary," he said, "Europe can have greater solidarity, and it has not yet fully exploited the potential for that and for greater cooperation. It is a particular privilege for us, Federal Chancellor Merkel, that we have you to hold the opening speech at this crucial moment for our future. And the issues that you will be addressing will be the issues that we shall be developing in this forum over the next few days. Federal Chancellor, you have been a tower of strength. You have tamed the storms, and in your calm and peaceful way, you have made a great contribution to ensuring that the European ship stays on course. As the Federal Chancellor of the largest European economy, you have also showed a great sense of responsibility. The theme of this yearly meeting is that we need new vision and new models for Europe and further developed models that we need here on the European continent, but also throughout the world, so that they can build up trust once again. Federal Chancellor, we are all very eager to hear the vision that you will propose to us here this afternoon.
Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Schwab,
Professor Schwab, Madam President, and allow me to welcome my colleague, the Prime Minister of Denmark, Helle Thorning-Schmidt, to welcome her very cordially on behalf of all of the heads of state and government, because she's currently in the presidency of the European Union. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Schwab, let me tell you that I very gladly accepted your invitation to come here again, and particularly to come here this year to the World Economic Forum. The annual meeting, after all, is in many ways the climax of many activities that you have during the year. The motto, the great transformation, shaping new models, that certainly is more than appropriate. It is also, however, very ambitious, but Davos, after all, has always been a very ambitious kind of place. What is needed is, as it were, a big rethink. And ever since 2008, 2009, we've been debating time and again what sort of lessons can we draw from this big global financial and economic crisis. So let us perhaps take a moment and reflect a question that I asked last year and that I'm going to ask this year. What sort of lessons have we learned from the global financial and economic crisis, and is it sufficient, what we've learned? I think the answer to that is, even in this year, it's still not quite sufficient. And if we're talking about having a rethink and breaking new ground, I think there's still room here for improvement, because if one is realistic, even perhaps a little bit pessimistic, one has to say that although in 2008, 2009 we've experienced very clearly that there is a very close interdependency. We've not been able to bring the Doha round to a successful conclusion, the international trade round. Quite the contrary, during our last meeting, the OECD said to us at the G20 that there are increasing signs of protectionism, so that protectionism is rather on the rise rather than the contrary. We have made certain progress as regards regulation. During our last G20 meeting in Cannes, we found rules and regulations for the big systemically important banks. But as regards the big area, an important area of shadow banks, we will have to wait another 2 years until we come to satisfactory regulations. And if people ask us, what have you learned? Because after all, there was a glaring lack of regulation that brought us into this predicament. Let me perhaps not elaborate at any great length about the financial transaction tax, but had the world actually learned its lesson, and had we all said we have to show to our citizens that we're not only paying some kind of tax on each and every product, but not on financial products, and we have to introduce that, well, we have to grant that it doesn't look promising. The outlook to Rio is going to be that we will meet in Rio de Janeiro, but if we say, is there a follow-up agreement on Kyoto? The President just mentioned it. We have to unfortunately be honest and say, well, there's going to be a time where we have less binding commitments in overall climate policy than more. So there is a lot that remains to be done to the global leaders, and we also have to come up with the necessary speed so we don't allow for unnecessary and irreversible damage to be done to our planet. Now, Europe certainly is a continent that currently needs to debate new methods. We've learned we're interdependent, we are part and parcel of one and the same world and one and the same global community, but we've also learned in Europe that the financial and economic crisis that started in America left a deep imprint on Europe, and we're still working on the fallout of this and trying to redress that. So Europe is a great and magnificent European political project, and I'm standing here before you firmly convinced that we, and I think I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues, wish to further develop this great achievement. On the anniversary of the signing of the Treaties of Rome, we said we are fortunate indeed in being united in Europe, and it is to our great luck that we are united, and we will not be happy and lucky if we do not show this commitment to unison. This year marks a year where the 7 billionth citizen of the planet was born. If we look at how the world has changed ever since the Second World War, Europe was a work of peace when it was first achieved, and I think we cannot overestimate what a success this was after centuries of wars that tore our continent apart. But at the time, there were 2.5 billion people living on this planet, and 500 billion were then Europeans. The Europeans have not exactly grown in size, but the world these days has 7 billion inhabitants, and we have about 7% of the population, 20% of the GDP, of the world's GDP in Europe. Both of these figures will shrink over the next few years. So apart from the question of war and peace, democracy and freedom, another question has been added to that. How can we actually maintain our position in this world? How can we bring our interests and our weight to bear? And this is only possible not for individual European countries. After all, we in Germany, for example, have about 1% of the world's population, and because like the rest of Europe, we have a demographic problem, the tendency is rather going downward. We need others to bring our weight to bear. So we are actually lucky to be able to be with others and to shape our common future. This motivates us to go through this crisis and to come out strengthened at the end of this process. What is at the foreground of discussions is quite often the problem of public indebtedness, of sovereign debt. This is why many people call this a sovereign debt crisis. But what has also become very clear, and this is just as important almost, is that we have difficulties and weaknesses as regards our competitiveness in a number of European countries. And that's even more difficult to combat. What's also become clear is that in those countries which share a common currency, where economic and monetary union has made progress to an extent where one decided to opt for the euro, there is a clear lack of political structures of the necessary underpinnings to make this project work. Now, we will not become faint-hearted in the face of this challenge. I am quite sure that this is an analysis that is shared basically by all. Those are deficits that have accrued over the years, and this means it's not going to be with one sort of waving of a magic wand we'll be able to overcome this or to get rid of this. But we are resolved to do what is necessary to address this. And because these structural weaknesses, because of the great burden that the global financial and economic crisis constituted, were much more acutely felt, we have to address them. We would probably have not had to acknowledge that there are these weaknesses at some point in time, but now we really have to do something about it, because now we have a very clear erosion of confidence on behalf of the rest of the world. They don't believe that we're able to cope with this. So the question needs to be, do we dare more Europe? And the year 2000 has shown, yes, we're ready to dare more Europe, to be more European. This is a good message. We're ready in 3 different areas to show that we're willing to dare more Europe in budgetary discipline, not only because we're talking about budgets here, about finances, but because we're talking about sustainability. This, after all, is what we're after, a stable growth, not only for Europe, but for the whole of the world. A stable situation for the global economy, and sustainability will have to be the trademark of future policy so that we come to stability. So the budget area, then secondly, the area of competitiveness, linked to that also jobs. That is a central and crucial area. People will not believe in Europe if there is too high unemployment. And thirdly, solidarity, showing solidarity towards each other. This, after all, is also an expression of our willingness and our conviction that we belong together, that we wish to belong together, and the world outside is expecting us to stand up for each other. If we think of the 2 first points that I mentioned and what has already been done by individual countries over the past year, I would hold that this is not sufficiently acknowledged by that many people. Maybe it's also not sort of really seen all that clearly by people. What's happening in Portugal, what's happening in Ireland, partly also in Greece, maybe not always to a satisfactory extent, what has been done by Spain. A lot more has actually been done than we have seen in the past. In the year 2000, European heads of state and government said until 2010 they want Europe to be the most competitive continent in the world. Quite open, quite frankly, and quite obviously we have not been able to achieve this. But over the past few years we have seen that something needs to be changed here. So it's not only austerity measures. I know each and everyone is talking about this, but this is not only in and of itself of the essence, but also structural reforms that lead to more jobs are essential. I'm deeply convinced of this. Look at all of the different examples we've seen in Europe that have already undergone those reforms. Sweden, for example, or look at the labor market reforms of Hartz IV that we have launched in Germany. They have brought about a massive change for the better in Germany. From more than 5 million, we have come down to less than 2. But we all know this takes longer than 12 months or 18 months to achieve. And it's extremely important that we are there for the duration, that we don't lose patience, that we remain steadfast on this course of reform. And since times so that matters are moving so quickly that people tend to be very impatient, we still have to convince each other that this is necessary. On the 30th of January, in only a few days, we shall have an extraordinary meeting of the heads of state and government of the European Union. We will also later on have our Spring Council, and on both of these jobs and growth will loom very large on the agenda. The Commissioner of the President of the European Commission said we have 23 million companies in Europe. We have 23 million people who are out of a job in Europe. If each and every one of these companies were to employ a person, we would have solved the problem. I know this is too simplistic of you, but it is a start to think of it in this way. We have no really true mobility on the labour market among European member countries because we have not as yet such a convergence of labour market reforms. We have to look at which countries have made the best experience. We have to look at those benchmarks. We have to look at the legal systems underpinning those. For example, even though labour legislation may not be an area where there is a European competence, we need to take a closer look at that. We also have to reflect where are funds that perhaps do not make the best and most effective possible use of their monies. How can we address that? How can we make better use of this? How can we perhaps set up partnerships between countries that have made very good experience in certain areas? Because I think it is really urgently necessary that particularly young people can make the experience that there is progress. If there are certain countries that have a 20% youth unemployment rate, some even 40%, I don't think it's a great miracle that you've seen many young people not being exactly convinced that Europe is a good option for them. We are convinced and that the Danish presidency is going to pursue this together with the European Commission and incidentally, independently of whether you belong to the euro area or not, this is a project that we can all join in on. We have, for example, the Euro Plus Pact that allows us to do that. There are also quite a number of people who ask us, what about more binding commitments in Europe and more solidarity? I think in Europe we have now come to a point where foreign policy gradually seems to become a common domestic policy. We have to debate what the shape and form the single market ought to take. We have to be candid and honest here. It's of no use to always sort of say we're so lucky, we're so fortunate to be united in this great Europe. That is true, but if future generations are to say the same thing, then it is incumbent upon us to turn this Europe into a well-working one, into a functioning Europe, which means we have to be ready to transfer more competences to Europe. We have a Stability and Growth Pact. We've had this in place for many years, but this Stability and Growth Pact was not kept. Actually, Germany and France have even watered it down. At the time when the Lisbon Treaty was drawn up, it was said the European Court of Justice will not be given the competence to pass a ruling on us if we infringe upon the rules. So in the end, they were saying, our publics were saying, but they're promising things that they don't really keep. And that is the view all over the world. So the real message of the fiscal compact that we're trying to agree on right now is that each and every one is to introduce a cap on debts, a so-called debt break, and inscribe this in incorporate it in the Constitution, and the European Court of Justice will monitor this, whether this is actually done. So we are no longer using any excuses, or we are no longer deluding ourselves or deluding others. We're opting for this, and this is of the essence, because otherwise we will lose credibility. But I'm telling you, over the next few years, there have to be more steps of integration. This cannot be the last one. We will have to make more progress in the interest of our competitiveness and of job creation, as I said earlier on. Obviously, one can also argue, why do they make these incredibly ambitious appeals to us? And I know that Germany, some people say it's because of economic imbalances, and whether it makes sense within one common monetary area to actually look at economic imbalances. I mean, whether I could do the same thing for Germany, because the north traditionally is much stronger is much weaker in Germany than the south, and there are also certain inherent tensions there. But it's true, there are tensions right now in the euro area. Germany is going to participate in reducing such imbalances in those areas where we see unfair barriers existing, for example, in the services area. But if these imbalances come out of different levels of competitiveness, that brings us to a very interesting point. Do we wish coherence and consistency without ambition? Then all of this boils down to the lowest common denominator. Or do we wish to look at who actually has the best practices, who can serve as a benchmark for all of us? Then we have an opportunity, if we follow those role models, to actually be global players. It's not only cohesion at all costs that we should be after, but the role of Europe. What sort of role can Europe play in a globally interdependent world? And so what we cannot say, because for 50 years we've been at the very top, we're confident that we will remain there for the next 50 years. No, quite the contrary. We have to work for this every day. We have to have competitive products in our product range that people like to buy all over the world. We have to be innovative. And if we are not able to do this, then for many, many years to come, we will certainly be an interesting place to take a vacation in, but we will not be able to maintain or even increase prosperity for our people. So what's important is not who is stricter, who is less strict. What's important is creating and maintaining prosperity for Europe of the future, and I think we ought to be ambitious in bringing this about. Which is why I am firmly convinced that we need to continue to work on this. Obviously, there are certain first steps that we have already made and that will bring us closer to a fiscal compact and a fiscal union. But if I look at the discussions that are still raging, how can we be more cohesive? And how can I would say that we can even be even faster, even more resolved in bringing about changes. Is Europe actually growing closer together? That's what's happened over the past few months. There is a tension still. One can be very open in addressing that. There are Euro member countries and non-Euro member countries. We have to be very careful that this Europe of the 27 remains a common Europe, where obviously certain countries work more closely together in certain areas than others, but I'm convinced that we can keep this common Europe together. Now, how do I measure this solidarity of European members for each other, and particularly in the euro area? I sometimes have the impression that internationally people seem to use as a yardstick the degree to which we are willing to be liable for each other, and to what extent we are willing to set up a file, the extent to which we are willing to actually spend money. And that is a very controversial issue, a very contentious issue. It has quite a lot to do also with where you actually come from different cultures. We have set up a temporary rescue mechanism in the shape and form of the EFSF. We have 770 billion guarantees. The markets only say, well, it's 440 really in real money, because they want to be AAA. We have the necessary programs. Portugal, Ireland, and in future also Greece can be financed. Then we have rendered this umbrella more flexible. No one has actually yet had recourse to it, which is a good thing. It's a good thing that this has not yet been necessary. And then we said, let's set up a permanent mechanism, because that is a clear acknowledgement that this is not just a short-term exercise, but a lasting and durable one. 550 billion of capital that has already been paid in. One may rely on this, because this is going to take the shape and form of an instrument under international law, signed by all. And then people say this is not sufficient, although the ECB by the end of the year was supporting our banks on a 3-year basis through 500 billion. And then people say, but this has to be double. Then we would believe you. Others say it has to be triple. Then we would actually be true believers in your solidarity. Now that brings me to the question, but for how long will this be credible? Because if people then say, well, show us whether you actually have the money, are we still credible? Allow me, each and every of our countries in Europe is a strong country, or some a little bit stronger, others a little less stronger. People believe that Germany is particularly strong. True, Germany is quite strong. It's particularly big compared to others, but it's not as if we were saying we don't wish to show solidarity. We are not willing to enter into binding commitments. That is not true. We have said right from the start that we wish to stand up for the euro. But what we don't want is a situation where we are forced to promise something that in the end we will not be able to fulfill. If Germany, for example, on behalf of all of the other member countries, were promising something that if the markets really attack us, we will not be able to come up with, then we have indeed an open flank. And I think we have shown in many, many ways that we are serious about showing solidarity and binding commitments. The rescue package, in the willingness that we say, yes, if we violate the rules, we are ready to have others bring legal action against us, and also communitarize those areas that are yet not part and parcel of community law. All of that we say to those who are questioning our solidarity and our steadfastness to stand up and our willingness to stand up for others. Ladies and gentlemen, the problems that Europe has are the ones that I addressed quite frankly here. Let me tell you, I know that we are labeled the big economic headache of the global economy, but I think if one is honest, we're probably not the only headache that the global economy has. There are a number of other countries where quite a lot still remains to be done. If we agree on this, I am calm because I know we all have our work cut out for ourselves and will be kept busy for the next few months. For the next G20 meeting, when we meet in Mexico, I want us to work on the agenda for growth and employment. The Mexican presidency has set out an agenda on this, apart from green growth, sustainable growth, food security, and also climate protection and energy. We will need to continue to work on financial market regulation and also on how can we secure free world trade. Now, one last remark on the transatlantic relationship. Because we make such slow progress on the Doha round, one will probably resort to a course of action where individual regions will come to bilateral agreements with certain other regions. We've done that with South Korea. We're working on one with Japan, although I don't consider this to be the best course of action. But I think also across the Atlantic, we have many, many possibilities of creating a free trade area that we as yet do not have. We are the most important trading partners in the United States and Europe, and the potential of our cooperation has by far not been tapped. We have still quite numerous obstacles that hinder us from more cooperation, for example, in the non-tariff area, services, investments, technical standards, public procurement, to mention but a few. And I'm very gratified to note that I notice both from the European and the American side a willingness to work together more. It'll take some time, but there is this willingness. Apart from our cooperation with many others, with Japan, with India, with Latin America, apart from these classical areas that we cooperate in, I see many, many other areas where we can work together more closely. I wish you every success. I wish you interesting and fruitful discussions. I think Davos opens up great opportunities for having open debates, and I've noticed that there are quite a number of players from particularly the social security area that are present here. I would like to tell you, quite frankly, we as politicians need this kind of input because we've seen, after all, we can only achieve success and can only be successful if we work together. The experience that we Europeans made from the global financial and economic crisis is that our market economy has proved itself in such a sense that both sides of industry have to be in on this for our economies to be successful. So every success for your meetings here in Davos.
Frau Bundeskanzlerin,
Federal Chancellor, you have raised a lot of issues that are important to us, and you've given answers to those questions too. And you said that you are prepared to go into some of them perhaps in a little more detail. My first question is in connection with the vision. You said we need to dare more Europe, and we need to have more, we need to give more powers to Europe. What is your long-term vision of Europe? Are we going in the direction of the United States of America? How do you see the future of Europe? If a young man or a young woman were to ask you today, what will Europe look like in 20 years' time? What would be your answer?
I actually think that we're a model in and of itself, a very unique model. The United States of America so quickly will not be a sort of role model to follow, but I think what we really need is a very clear commitment among ourselves that we wish to coordinate our policies as closely as possible. As regards the relationship between the nation-state and Europe, we will have very difficult debates ahead of us because particularly in Germany there are very strict rules that are laid down and are also monitored by our Federal Constitutional Court as to the very nature and structure of a nation-state. I would say to young people in a few years' time, you will be able to change your residence as students do it these days. Quite often you will be able to take your pension rights with you. You will be able to take out insurances. You will be able to take up a place of residence and also to work. That is something that essentially you can do already now, but there are still quite a lot of obstacles to actually doing this. So I hope that there's going to be a European public that will come out of that and will develop out of that, where it will be more and more a matter, of course, not only for students, but also for pensioners, for workers to live and work in different places during what, and the European institutions. Well, I think we have to actually become used to the Commission becoming more and more like a government with all the competences that it will be given. For us in Germany, this is not all that unusual because we have, after all, Länder governments that have their own competences. We will probably have a stronger European Parliament and the heads of state and government will be something like a second chamber, and the European Court of Justice will be our legal instance, and for many legal questions the last.
Federal Chancellor.
And I hope that almost all countries will then be members of the euro. Not all, but I don't want to create diplomatic problems here.
Well, let's hope so. And do you mean the UK, Denmark? The Prime Minister is here today. Let's perhaps not go too deeply into that. But you were talking about the values of Europe, peace, freedom and democracy. This has always been the message that Europe has given to the rest of the world. Do you not believe that peace by the younger generations is taken for granted? Freedom is also taken for granted. And democracy is considered to be something that works very slowly, but people are starting to doubt it. What should be the message for Europe in the 21st century?
Well, I believe that each and every generation needs to ensure that democracy works. We actually have to face great challenges, particularly as regards, for example, the importance of the internet, as regards the wish of people to participate. The traditional parties will have it very difficult to be able to secure the support of their voters for all times. There will be certain projects that young people will be interested in, and then they will follow parties on that. But the democratic structures will change. But the general democratic principles, that there is freedom of opinion, that there's a secret ballot, that there's freedom of voting, I will certainly stand up for this because I haven't yet seen a better model. The biggest danger that I see is that a number of people who do not know the sort of democracy that we have will say to people, well, it is so slow, but these politicians are not really granting us our rights. That is something that still would perhaps be acceptable, but that they are constantly living at the expense of future generations. If that is the accusation that is leveled against us, then we have a big problem. Madam.
With President Sarkozy, Chancellor, you've done a great deal together for Europe. You're a tandem in a way. But there are a number of question marks over that as well. How do you see the integration in the future? How do you see the basic basis for that process that you're driving with President Sarkozy? And where would the problems lie in your view?
I believe that it is, on the one hand, expected from Germany and France that we show a harmonious front when we come to the Council meetings, and that people don't really like us when we announce something previously. So they don't like us at all when we don't like each other, and they don't like us either when we have already agreed upon most matters before we come there. And then people are frustrated because they think, well, they are the ones who call the shots, apparently. Why is this important? It's important because it's not that Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy are so important, but in the way of thinking of French politicians and also German politicians, there are certain basic patterns of contradictory patterns as well are played out, and we have to overcome them. The Belgian Prime Minister said to me recently that Belgium is actually quite a good role model because in a very, on a small scale, it is in a way emblematic of what France and Germany have by way of systems. The Poles, for example, are saying, but who do you think you are? Italy and Spain, after all, are also big countries, and Europe is only working if we strike the right balance between the so-called bigger and the so-called smaller countries. And that's not an easy task to have. The Danish Prime Minister will also be able to tell us a thing or two about this. Anyone who's ever been in the presidency knows how difficult it is to inform each and every of those 27 member countries at one and the same time about what's going on. And they also have to overcome language barriers. In a few years' time, we will also have telephone conferences. I'm quite confident that our ministers already do it. Our modes of communication with each other also need to be changed. But it's not always all that easy. It's fun also. And it's an ambitious project.
Dr. Merkel, when you mentioned the countries at the end of your presentation, you didn't say anything about Russia. Russia is a very important partner of Europe. Could you say a few words about our relations with Russia and what you would like to see as the relationship between Europe and the Russian Federation in the future?
Well, Europe, as we see it, I think, also, I would like to remind you, is after all surrounded also by countries who wish to be closer to Europe, what with the, for example, European partnership. Poland, the Ukraine are very good examples of that, but also Moldova and others. Secondly, we have a situation with Turkey that we have not yet resolved, and that is quite a delicate one. And we also have a relationship with Russia that is being intensified. We will also have debates about certainly about the process of democratization. But Russia, after all, is a very important supplier of energy. It's an important possible market for European products. It's also a very important partner for many foreign policy issues. So I think I consider them to be a very important partner, which is why I've always tried to foster our relationship. But and that's also important, never sort of without at the same time acknowledging the interests of Poland. We, together with Poland and vis-à-vis Russia.
Dr. Merkel, with great courage and steadfastness, you have shown. Is there something that you doubt in your policy?
Verzweifelt bin ich ja noch nicht, sonst würde ich ja nicht hier sitzen.
I'm not yet all that doubtful or despairing, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But things do tend to take a very long time. Sometimes I know we Germans are also at fault here. On the one hand, you have this enormous dynamism in the economic area, and then on the other hand, the fact that it's only legitimate to have all those who are participating in the political process truly giving them their say. So I would like to ask all of you who are here as representatives of the business community, please realize that when you're working in a democracy, it is a great thing to be in, and please take the long drawn-out processes with a certain degree also of acceptance. What would be your wish? How can the side of industry or the business community support you in your work? The business community, to the extent that they come from Europe, can give a contribution by creating more jobs, creating thereby more hope for people. I think our industry representatives ought to be candid, or to tell us why they leave us and go to other places in the world. We want to create jobs for people in Europe. And for those who look from the outside, have not yet invested in Europe, I would invite them. Take a very close look on what has happened over the past 12 to 18 months. Europe will become more attractive once we have gone through this crisis, and I'm absolutely convinced that we will be able to master this crisis and get out of it. Then Europe will have done a lot of its homework, so please don't forget us when you're thinking of investments.
Yes, so we wish you every good wish, and we thank you very much indeed for having come to make this presentation and speak to us this evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Ich darf jetzt Frau Hilde Schwab.
I'd now like to invite Mrs. Hilde Schwab up here to the rostrum, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, dear friends. As it is tradition, we are now celebrating this year's Crystal Award winners. Extraordinary artists who at the same time take to heart global issues. This celebration has a symbolic character, but is today more important than ever. When we discuss all the many global challenges over the next days, we should not forget whatever rational solutions we may find to meet those challenges, they will only be sustained if underpinned by values. We have to make sure that during this meeting we communicate not only with our brains, but also with our heart. And when looking at the world and its people, we also show passion and compassion. Cultural leaders, with their sensitivity and imagination, are an important part of our meeting. They help us understand the world from a different perspective. We created this Crystal Award together with our mentor, the late Lord Yehudi Menuhin, as an appeal to all of us to think about fundamental values and purpose in life. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you three outstanding personalities who not only are exceptional professionals in their art, but also have a deep commitment to make this world a better place. Midori, violinist and founder, Midori Foundation. Midori is an outstanding violinist. She gave her first public performance at the age of 6 and had her concert debut at age 11 with the New York Philharmonic under Zubin Mehta. 10 years later, she founded Midori and Friends, a non-profit organization that aims to bring quality music education to inner-city children in New York. Ever since, she has been engaged in teaching thousands of children and has brought music closer to the lives of people, also in hospitals and institutions, who otherwise might not be involved with the arts. but she also inspires her students to do community work. At the same time, Midori is continuing her career as one of the world's most celebrated artists. Midori, would you please join me on stage? It's a great pleasure for me to present you with this Crystal Award.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I am tremendously honored to be here and to accept this award. Those of you here today hold a powerful key to defining what the future will look like and how we will create and shape new models. As we discover how each of us can contribute to the positive impact of this year's meeting, I hope to bring a voice to how music continues to play a vital part in shaping our world. I am a musician, and though it might sound naive, I believe music brings us together, and teaching music to children and providing them with access to creative outlets can and will have a beneficial impact on our future as a global society. Music allows us to communicate and express ourselves in ways that go beyond language barriers, and it enriches our lives in extraordinary and necessary ways. Today, as our world's population surges past 7 billion and technological advances transform the very nature of relationships and communication, it is more important than ever to embrace the very essence of humanity. The human capacity to appreciate the arts is universal and has no generational or geographical limitations. The connections forged through music and the collaboration of playing or singing together often transcend cultural, social, and political differences. In my travels, I see families living in dire poverty. In some of the developing countries that I have gone to, I watch children throughout the day rummaging through huge mountains of trash, looking for scrap metal in order to survive. But it is more than just issues of poverty. Recently, I, along with 3 aspiring young musicians, traveled to Mongolia to share our music. I would like to read a few lines from a journal kept by one of our young musicians, written on the day that we visited a school for the hearing impaired. In a completely spontaneous gesture, the students, who ranged in age from very young to their late teens, all reached out to put their hands on my cello in order to feel the vibrations of the sound I was producing, because they could not hear it with their ears. Having the human contact of 10 or 15 hands directly on my instrument was an overwhelming sensation for me as the music flowed out of me and into their bodies. It was one of the most moving moments of my life, and I will never forget it. Afterwards, over and over, the students related their appreciation in sign language to the interpreter. Their honest gratitude made it clear to me that even if they couldn't hear our music properly, they could still perceive the essence of what we were doing, the essence of music, a special, meaningful, and important connection between human beings. As a musician, I, along with my colleagues, may offer a different form of solace and answer to the question posed by this annual forum. But I do believe that while each of us cannot fix everything, by working together, each in our own way, we will be able to ensure that this century makes great strides in improving the human condition. Thank you again for this honor, and I look forward to exploring the ways in which we might all work together. Thank you.
Luc Besson, filmmaker, screenwriter and producer, and founder EuropaCorp. Luc Besson is a French film director, writer and producer. He has written and produced numerous award-winning movies like Subway, La Femme Nikita, The Fifth Element, just to mention a few. Luc Besson was a scuba diver at a young age, and with his films Atlantis, produced in 1991, and The Big Blue, he demonstrated his passion for the oceans and the issue of environmental protection. And true to the saying that images are more powerful than words, he is an inspiration for us all and for future generations to take care of our planet. His last film, The Lady, is about the part of the life of Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese Nobel Prize winner. You will remember that she delivered a message to the participants of this meeting last year. My husband visited her last fall. She would have liked to be with us this year, but has now to prepare for elections. We will, however, show her video message during this annual meeting. And Luc Besson will present the movie at the cinema in Davos this evening. Luc Besson, it gives me great pleasure to present to you with this Crystal Award.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to receive this prize. Very honored and a little disturbed because I have the feeling that I have done so little, in fact. And I hope I will do much more in the future. I feel, in fact, like a little grain of sand. But in the same time, millions of grains of sand all together can make the most beautiful beach in the world. So I guess that only if we are together, millions of us, not 1%, not 99%, but 100% all together, I think we can maybe have this world a little better. And 2 days ago, my little daughter, 8 years old, asked me, Dad, is it true that the world is going to collapse soon? And it takes me a little while to hold my emotion, and I lied to her because I said, darling, of course not. And so yes, today, believe me, I am committed to try to improve the world, because I think the real question is, do we like our children? Do we love our children? And if the answer is yes, then we have to work all together, more and more, all together. And I just want to finish by a little old saying from an Indian tribe. When the man will cut the last tree on earth, mankind will realize that we cannot eat money. Thank you so much.
Yvonne Chaka, singer and president, Princess Africa Foundation. Yvonne Chaka is a renowned singer-songwriter born in Soweto. She is one of South Africa's most remarkable artists with an exceptional musical career. She passionately supported the end of apartheid with hit songs like I Cry for Freedom and Motherland. At the same time, Yvonne Chaka began a campaign against malaria and became the first goodwill ambassador for the Global Rollback Malaria Partnership. Through her Princess of Africa Foundation, she supports the Global Fund to eradicate HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. As a final, very special moment of this ceremony, Yvonne Chaka has agreed to sing for us. This is also a tribute to President Nelson Mandela, who was on this very stage exactly 20 years ago, with a speech for what was considered as the end of apartheid in South Africa. I am very happy to present this Crystal Award to Yvonne Chaka.
Guten Abend, good evening, Sanbonani. I'm truly honored to receive this award, especially since South Africa's champion for freedom and justice, Nelson Mandela, graced these halls with his presence 20 years ago. Growing up in South Africa during apartheid, I lived with inequalities in all aspects of my life. My experience as a child taught me that giving people dignity is vital to building kinder, fairer societies, which are not only possible but critical to creating a safer and secured world. I've long believed that songs that promote understanding speak much louder than bullet shots that I had growing up in Soweto. In recent years, my fight against injustice has become global. Working as a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF and Rollback Malaria Partnership, as well as MDG Envoy for Africa, I've seen that there is a global apartheid in accessing health. Men, women, and children are dying unnecessarily of preventable and treatable diseases. They have almost no access to basic health services and are trapped in a cycle of poverty and sickness. Women and children will be particularly hit hard if the Global Fund and Gavi are not fully funded. Ladies and gentlemen, healthy people create healthy economies. Investing in health is no-brainer. We here in this room today are the global political and business elite. We have the power, the money and the knowledge to ensure that all people have access to health care. January 8, 2012 marked the 100th anniversary of the African National Congress, the liberation movement that ended apartheid in South Africa. That is why I'm standing here today. I want to say thank you to all those who fought and died to give me back my dignity. Amazing things are possible when Africa's leaders work in partnership with their local communities and are supported by the rest of the world. I believe we can bring effective health care to Africa's poor. We need to end this social injustice in order to build safe, stable, healthy, and secure world. Hilde and Klaus, I have never seen angels on earth, but you look like two angels trying to make a world a better place. Luke and Midori, I want to say to you, the struggle goes on. Aluta continua. As we are all sitting here today, we are all men, but we who bring life into this world are well-organized men, and that makes me and those few women out there, and the men who want to be well-organized men. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to do something that I get paid for doing, but tonight I'll do it for nothing. The song is called Power of Africa. It goes like this. Hello, Dad.
Cha-cha. It's away. Social love away. Africa #1. Thank you to Hilde and Klaus and all of you sitting there, the whole World Economic Forum community. I want to say it's all in your hands. And when you are there, just remember, summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Hilde, your dad is rich and Klaus, and your ma is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. Merci.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I'm sure Madiba also enjoyed it from a distance. It is now my pleasure to invite Archbishop Tutu to the stage.
I don't have to introduce Archbishop Desmond Tutu. First, he has been here already several times. Second, everybody knows you. But nevertheless, let me just say some words. Officially, you have retired, but you still serve as chair of the Elders, a group of independent global leaders brought together by Nelson Mandela in 2007. You were the leading figure in the anti-apartheid struggle, a leading figure, a global champion for human rights, and you are best known for leading South Africa's inspiring and sometimes very painful Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984 in recognition of your efforts. Despite all of what you have seen in your life, and perhaps because of it, you preach forgiveness, and you are unshakable in your belief that human beings are born for goodness. I also admire your engagement for issues which may escape broader global attention. For example, I just mentioned childhood marriage. Now I have the great pleasure to ask you to have a dialogue. And Archbishop Tutu, you are very often described as the moral conscience of South Africa, even the world. would you just suggest that moral conscience in our world, or let me ask it in the following way, did we lose the sense of morality in our world of today?
Well, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. I have to tell you that a few years ago, I was in San Francisco. You say, people say he's well known. And a lady came up and she greeted me very warmly and said, "Hello, Archbishop Mandela." Part of what makes our life so wonderful and interesting is the fact that deep down each one of us knows when things are right and when things are wrong. It is something that is inborn in us. And I think, that you don't, it's, as they say, you don't need any rocket science to realize, that there is something fundamentally wrong in our world. And I wouldn't say we have lost. Perhaps we have, some of us or many of us tended to ignore that voice deep down that says, hey, this is right. This is wrong. You know, well, maybe not you, but I have often said, and not wanted to listen to the voice that says, hey, this is right, this is wrong. And one of the appeals we made, Yvonne was speaking about how we've got our freedom, Nelson Mandela quite rightly, and the ANC and so on. But it was actually also because the world supported us. The world was aware that no. Discrimination based on race, on ethnicity, that's wrong. And they were part of the reason why ultimately justice and goodness prevailed.
Archbishop, we have this deep feeling inside ourselves, but there is something in between.
Yes.
How do we act if we are confronted with this feeling in us which tells us you shouldn't do what you are intending to do?
Well, the fact of the matter is that each one of us is in fact made for goodness. Ultimately, that is what each of us strive after, even bankers.
I agree.
But just now, we have a world that, in fact, has made tremendous strides. We have many more children going to school. We have many more people having access to health care than before. And yet we are aware that there are inequalities in the world which are very much fueling unrest. We are in danger of losing what we have accomplished. And so I would want to say to all of us here that we need to be looking at the whole issue of equity. Equity, which you might call fairness. That equity doesn't mean equality. We are born each with an infinite worth, but we are not equal. You are more handsome than me.
I doubt.
But I mean, you have some people taller than others. No. Equity is saying that people are longing for there to be the kind of dispensation where we can have equal opportunities. We can have the possibility of being able to develop our God-given gifts. Because just now, we are aware that the world is lacking in a fairness. You know, we are seeing a world that ought to be a very prosperous world. And there is a great deal of prosperity. I mean, we would want to see a world where, workers get a fair remuneration. But that is not all. We want a world where we don't have executives being paid such astronomical amounts. Sometimes in failing institutions, they are able still to give themselves bonuses. We're seeing a world where people are saying, no, please, we want a world where we will have equity. We will have social and economic equity. We will, now we're speaking about a world that is in turmoil. There is a great deal of unrest. It's wonderful in many ways. It is wonderful that today we can speak of the Arab Spring, but we can also speak about Occupy Wall Street. Because people are saying, we need a world where each of us are able to develop our potential to the fullest possible extent.
But, Archbishop, there is maybe a contradiction. You may create a situation in the society where all have equal chances. But human beings utilize those chances in different ways. So even if you have a world with equal chances, you end up with inequality. What do you mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are people who invest their resources, and they jolly well ought to get the rewards from that. But what one is saying is, once the world is not a world of equilibrium where people feel they are able to bring their own particular gifts. I mean, we don't have to be overbright to think, we have excluded many people for a very long time. Women, for instance. My answer to you would be to say, you know what? If our world exacerbates the differences, that is, as sure as anything, going to lead to unrest. People being, I am poor, but I watch over there and I see someone who throws away food. I know that I'm not entirely stupid, but I haven't got the same opportunities as that over there. And you know what? One of the things that we are learning more and more is that we are interconnected. Now, in our part of the world, we speak of something called Ubuntu. Ubuntu. Ubuntu saying a person is a person through other persons. And have you discovered something? We are all Africans. God said we really actually are one. And it's not just crazy ideas. We come, that is what science says, not storybooks. Science says the origin of humankind is in Africa. You must be nice to us. Yeah? But what I am saying is, to put it in another way, many of us are saying, please recognize that we are actually family. Yvonne was saying, how is it that children in some of the places that she's been to die of preventable disease? And what do? We spend billions on instruments of death and destruction in our defense budgets. It is immoral. When a very small fraction of those budgets would ensure that children everywhere would have clean water to drink, would have enough food to eat, would have a decent education. And I'm appealing to you here, you shakers and movers. I'm appealing to you to say we look for a world of greater equity, a world, especially a world that will give women their proper place. We won't make it without the women. We really won't.
I agree.
We won't make it. Well, God decided that long ago. God said to Adam, it's not good for this man to be alone. And God said, choose from the animals a partner. He tried. No partner there. And then God produced Eve. And Adam said, yeah. This is just what the doctor ordered. But the truth of the matter is, we won't make it alone. We are created for interdependence. And we require we won't make it. You can be as rich as you like. You can be as powerful as you like. Ultimately, there is a rot that will undermine it all. And we are seeing it in this turmoil that is happening.
This is a very powerful message, Archbishop. Now, certainly everybody would agree with this ideal of equality. But what would you propose? What are the most practical steps which you see in order the leaders here, what can they take in terms of practical steps to address inequality and inequity?
Yes.
And particularly, now I will ask you this question later.
Yes. I think, that we have begun to realize that when you exclude a whole section of our communities from decision making, we have been excluding women. Now, if you wanted a formula from me,
a practical
yes,
advice.
I would say one of the first things that we must do is to ensure that there is gender equity, equality. Will you provide me with security when I leave here, because the men won't like what I'm going to say.
All security you wish.
Yes.
Only female security.
No, but this is serious. I have tried to say, what we need is a revolution led by women. I think women ought to be saying to us men, you have made a mess. Just get out and let us in. Let me tell you why.
But then we exclude 50% of the world population.
Yes. Women, when that war kept going on in Liberia, the women decided, no, we have had enough. And they said, we want to drive the devil back to hell. It's no wonder 2 of the women in Liberia got the Nobel Peace Prize, and the third was a woman again from Yemen. Unless we reorder the way we do things, and we say we are going to try and have economic and social equity. Look at what is happening. Young people right around the world are in touch with one another through the internet, through YouTube, through blogs and whatever. And it was young people who drove very much the Arab Spring. And it is largely young people in the Occupy movement. I believe it is possible for us to say, well, here we are. We have been given an opportunity to make a new beginning. Let us realign forces. Let us ensure that women have a significant part in decision-making processes. And let us listen to young people. Because if we don't, no matter how many missiles we might have, no matter how powerful we may think we are, in the end, if we are hollow morally, our world is going to collapse.
Archbishop Tutu, we have a surprise for you. We have created a community of young global leaders. We call them global shapers. And actually, in this community, you find people who have been very essential in the Arab Spring. And we want to highlight the importance of this community. And therefore, if you remain seated, please, and I will ask the young people to join us, to stand in the back, and we will show, as long as they come up, a short film, 3 minutes, about those young people. And then I will ask you, as soon as those young people, together with those who have been responsible to create this group, which is now active, by the way, in over 140 cities after 7 months of creation. And then at the end, I will ask you to address, to say in a short message, what do you say to such young people? What is their responsibility? So can I ask the Global Shapers to come up, please, and can we show the film?
The Global Shapers community is already covering the globe.
What we are doing here is not something which is new or innovative. What we are doing here is something very compulsory.
To implement change effectively, you need to listen to the voice of the people. And really a large component of the people today are the youth. And this is a great opportunity now, through the introduction of the Shapers, to hear the voice of the youth.
So there are hubs in the major cities of the world. And in each city, you can work as a group, as a hub, and then you also have this regional aspect because you interact with different hubs in the region and have international events.
This is a generation that's already empowered. We just want to bring them together and help make them even more effective.
You have people from all different backgrounds in the Global Shapers program.
People who are working in the field of education.
We have 2 social entrepreneurs. There's somebody from the NYPD in the room. There's a doctor in the room. There's a celebrity blogger in the room.
So it's such a illustrious crowd of like dynamic people, and it's great because when we sit on the same platform, we have so much to share with each other.
When you mesh all of that together, the skill sets and just the energy of the group is unlike anything that I've really seen before.
You can't have the local impact without the global context. We imagine Shapers in New York who care about solving homelessness in their community, being connected to Shapers in Shanghai and Johannesburg, all interested in the same issues with the same passions, and really using the best insights from that global network to make the biggest possible difference in their own communities.
I think that's what we feel as Global Shapers in that room is this isn't exactly something extraordinary. We're supposed to be doing this. This is what we're supposed to be doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a great moment. It's the official launch of the Global Shapers Group. Please welcome those Global Shapers.
You want me to go and let me go and stand over there.
And
yes.
What is your message to those young people?
Yes.
He becomes young. Huh?
First of all, congratulations. You are just fantastic. Do you know what? God has always used young people, right down the ages. Some of God's best fellow workers have been young people like you. Why? Because you dream. You dream God's dream. You dream of a different kind of world. You dream of a world where none will go hungry just because other people hoard. You dream God's dream. And I say, go on dreaming God's dream. Dream of a world where war is no more. Dream of a world, where poverty is history. Dream of a world that is more compassionate, that is more gentle, that is more caring. And God says, you know what? I have no one except you and you and you and you and you and you and you to help my dream, God's dream, to become a reality. Go for it.
Let's make those dreams a reality. Let's work for it during the next days. This concludes our opening session. Thank you, the Shapers. Thank you, Archbishop. And we will have now the drums to accompany us outside.